Hi everyone, I'm back with a new video on what I've been studying in my Masters in Psychology, and today I want to talk about America's weird influence on society. So let me get into it. So I'm going to start off with historical psychology, where not this week because it's been a couple of weeks now, but a couple of weeks ago we were learning about weird sampling. So weird sampling or weird bias technically refers to the fact that psychology's research is not diverse. So it's actually shown that 96% of the research that is presented to us predominantly through psychology journals comes from 12% of the world's population. So what does that mean? It means that it comes from predominantly Western European countries, and it's not reflective of the entire demographic of people who could actually be affected by that particular issue. So what that means is that, at least if we look at it from America's influence, I find that sometimes society lives in a representation of America where we are considered, particularly as women, sometimes as a black woman, how I'm represented, how I'm seen, what is impactful, what it means to me can sometimes be drawn on from American influences, and it's not really reflective of who I am and everything that I bring to the table and how my culture also plays a part in this. And this has also been seen in psychological research, because actually in 2023 to 2027, predominantly a lot of the details that was placed in the journals came from the US. So once again, if we're reading mental health information, or if we're reading psychological research about a population that lives in a completely different climate, has a different currency, eats a different diet, practices different beliefs, and so on, it's not reflective. And what does it actually mean about what we're being told about ourselves? Does it mean that it's accurate? Does it mean that it's a true reflection of who we are in society? I don't think so, which is why it's really important for us to not just do research that is reflective of other representations around the world, but also really important for us to not present ourselves and to Americanize ourselves as a form of identity. Which leads me on to my second point, which is in relation to cognitive psychology. And we were learning about linguistics and language, and kind of how language is formed, how language comes together, and how we create mental dictionaries. So in particular, the reference there is semantics. And this is how we make references to things and how we bring things together. So going back to America's weird influence on society, I have felt like, particularly as a black woman, a lot of how we're seen in society, a lot of the representation stems from American culture. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying it's not a true reflection of who I am, especially as someone who was born in Congo in Africa and has grown up in the UK. There are so many nuances, there are so many things that I bring to the table. There are so many things that is important to me. Like, I like drinking tea just as much as I like eating pondu, which is my native food. So actually that is more reflective of who I am, and I want to live in a society where the words and the references and the way that we're perceived is more reflective of who we are as individuals, and not reflected as part of this kind of like massive overarching representations that have been placed within society. And I definitely think that's one of the ways that maybe directly or indirectly America's influences is starting to embed itself into who we are. And even just as women, not even just as a black woman, I feel like there are so many things, and obviously this has been studied before, like from a historical standpoint, from a racial standpoint, from so many perspectives, but I do think we need to be conscious of this and be intentional, and not allow even the media that we consume. Sometimes I feel also that I could be trapped in like American media, and it's like, I don't like that anymore. I don't want to listen to that anymore. I don't even watch that anymore. This is who I was, this is who I was previously, it's not who I am now. So kind of trying to break free of that representation of the mental frameworks, the meanings and the associations that could be tied to who I am as a woman in modern society, and where it comes from. Great. And then it then leads me on to biological, where we've been learning about the biological mechanisms of attention. And one of the things that stood out for me was when we looked at neglect. Neglect is basically when the left side of your brain isn't functioning in the way that it needs to. So it actually then starts to create, it causes you to kind of like forget the left side of your body and not to be able to kind of pay attention to that left side of space. So imagine you've had an injury to the brain, which has impacted kind of like your right hemisphere, and then now you're kind of like, you know, you might only dress yourself from the right side, not dress yourself from the left side. You might only pay attention to one side of your brain. You might only be able to do one thing from the right side. So completely neglecting and ignoring the left side of your body, and this happens to some people, and it was really interesting to learn about that, because I think we can also take for granted having a brain that's functioning in the way that it was designed to. So also kind of drawing back to the points that I've been making, when there is a highly influential representation of society, particularly the one that comes from the US, we can neglect parts of ourselves. We can neglect who we are. We can neglect even parts of our identity. You know, essentially it's kind of just like completely in the blind spot, because we're so ingrained and we're so fixated on trying to look a certain way, feel a certain thing, and you know, fit into this ideology that has been presented to us. So those are just some of my takeaways from my course this week, and it was predominantly focused on three things. So in historical psychology, we were learning about weird sampling or weird bias, where psychology is still not representative of the population, and psychological research still has a lot of gaps in fully being able to show research across lots of different races, diversities, genders, ethnicity, life experiences, or even geographical location as well. And then also in cognitive psychology, we were learning about linguistics and how our brain processes information, words, and how it makes meaning. And I think when we're living in a culture that's so closely embedded into one really strong dominating representation, it can then perpetuate meaning on what it means to be a woman, what it means to be black, what it means to be all of these things. And that is then the connotation that people carry and that people use for reference. And if this is ingrained in you over a long period of time, then you can start to neglect parts of yourself, parts of your culture, parts of your identity. And this just draws back on what we were learning about in biological around attention, and how if some parts of your brain isn't functioning, it can affect how you basically, how you draw attention to the left side of your of space. You know, so that could be your body, it could be just what's happening to the left, it could be writing to the left, driving to the left, and so on. So that's all that I've got for this week. Thank you for watching, and please make sure to also reference check, do your own reading, so that you can become more familiar with some of the terminologies and the ideas that I'm sharing in my videos. Thank you.